Remember, diffusion is the natural process where molecules move from a high concentration to a low concentration. But what about materials that are too big to be moved through, or need to go against diffusion? That's what we're going to see today with the idea of active transport. Types of active transport. Remember, active transport requires the cell to use energy to move materials. Sometimes materials are too large or need to go against diffusion. The cell membrane itself is a tightly compressed layer of lipids. Normally, objects can move freely to and fro, but sometimes they're too large to be able to fit through the membrane. That's where active transport needs to take into effect and use energy. What are the types of active transport? Phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is when the cell takes in large material. The cell will wrap itself around the material that it wants to take in and then engulf it, forming a membrane. Your white blood cells do this when ingesting bacteria. Here we see a sample video of an amoeba wanting to capture a paramecium. Notice how it's going to move its arms around the paramecium. Eventually, it's going to completely close it off, and the paramecium will be trapped. The amoeba would then release digestive enzymes, thus engulfing it. When cell membrane moves around the food and brings it into the cell, it's how your white blood cells eat bacteria. Once again, it's when the cell eats foods. It's using energy to move the membrane around the food, thus allowing it to consume and bring it into the cell, where it can begin to digest it. Another way you can easily think about it, phagocytosis is the way that the cell eats. So, next time you're at the dinner table, you don't have to say, "Oh, I'm going to eat." You can say, "Oh, I'm going to phagocytose." Penocytosis. Penocytosis is when the cell brings in liquid that contains large particles. Sometimes things like glucose and other things are trapped in solutions. That's when the cell needs to bring them in. Wraps membrane around liquid and brings it in, similar to phagocytosis except with liquid. Remember, once again, it's similar to phagocytosis, but with liquid. So instead of saying you're about to drink some water, you can say, "Oh my, I'm going to penocytose some liquid." Very fancy. Exocytosis, when the cell creates a vesicle, sac, around waste. Pushes the vesicle to the membrane and removes the waste. Exocytosis, waste is taken to the Golgi, where it then forms a lipid package around it. It's then transported to the membrane, where it releases it outside of the cell. It's kind of like how the cell poops. Here's an example of exocytosis. Watch the bottom part of the paramecia, and you'll see it extrude all of this material out of its back end. There it goes. There's nothing like a good exocytosis to make you feel a little bit lighter. So in conclusion, remember, phagocytosis is how the cell eats, penocytosis is how the cell drinks, and exocytosis is how the cell poops. Have a good one.